Hello friends, this is the 9th of September now, and this is the third lesson on this history. Yes, we did two, today is the third, and I feel rather good about it because it gave me hope for the future, even though the subject matter is going to be one which is rather painful in the history of the church. It's the first century and all the persecutions of the Christians. And you all saw films, Quo Vadis in the 60s and many other films, but we're going to quote from historians and give you as much information as possible. I think I will have to do 2 videos on this subject because there is so much information. In any case, Tertullian, a Christian writer from the 1st century, he said, ironically, about those who were prosecuting them, he said, Christians are to blame for everything. If the Tiber overflows, if the Nile doesn't irrigate its fields, if the sky is cloudy, if the earth trembles, if there is war or famine or plague, immediately pagans shriek, Christians to the lions, death to Christians. I will quote more from him at the end of the video. It's quite an amazing in his Apologia, in his defense of Christianity. It reads like an answer for these times. I will read it at the end. A rather long extract, but it's worth you listening to it, honestly, it is. Okay, so let's start with this, our third talk on this subject. The primitive church, the Christian church, the Catholic church in the first centuries of its existence. So we are going to see the church at the time of the persecutions by the empire. And we're going to talk today about the 1st century, but the second one I'll do will be, it will continue to the 3rd, 4th centuries, really. We know that by the 1st century there were already many Christians in practically all the main vital centers of the Roman Empire. So this new situation is obviously going to attract the attention of that pagan world, of course, because they had not known, they had never heard of this new sect. They had never heard of Jesus or Jesus Christ. And this was to provoke a total rejection. Why? Why this time? You remember that in the first 2 videos I said continuously that Rome did not have any problem with foreign gods or foreign religions. As they conquered territories, they would bring their own gods to the pantheon. That is what the pantheon means, pan, all, theon from theos, God. So there was no problem with all the other gods. So they had a certain tolerance, we would say today, yes. But however, with the Christians, something is going to be very, very different. Why are they going to find this open opposition and loathing by the empire towards them? Because of the first things they're going to find out about them. Because of they said absolutism, if the word exists. It's the first time they hear another religion that's going to say we will not accept all these other gods. We have our own God, and we can't possibly worship any other God. Ours, they said it openly, ours is the only true God. Ours is the only true religion. That's what they said. And they are going to say it openly, no compromise here. We cannot worship any other God. In other words, they would not consent, they're not going to accept, come what may, that their religion is the same as all other religions, and that all religions are the same. No, they say, they're different. They're different philosophies. We accept different philosophies, yes. Other peoples can have their religions, yes. We can't do anything about that except perhaps try to teach or to evangelize them. But we cannot possibly ourselves follow or worship any other God but our own, the one true God. That's their stand. And this was very new. It's new today, this attitude, this approach. This is why they were hated then, and perhaps have been hated ever since, and perhaps they are still hated today. Those who speak up, those who even today follow it uncompromisingly. They, in the first century Rome, did not consider their God as one more particular divinity, but as the one and true. They had their own one and true God, the only God, the Savior of the world. The pagan gods for Christians were false God, or as Saint Paul says, idols, in his letter to the Corinthians. The first letter, chapter 10, read it. They, he said, sacrifice to the devil, not to God. And this totally different is going to make them, in the eyes of pagans, the enemies of civilization. That is how they're seen. That is how they are viewed. Now perhaps the enemies of progress. It is not only the pagans, though. We see by the histories that there is also a great deal of hostility coming from the diaspora Jews themselves. The diaspora had Jews were living everywhere too. So these hostility towards these Jewish Christians, that they couldn't very well forgive these Jewish Christians, not forgive them for their apostasy, as they saw it, apostasy to the law of Moses. And yes, they're going to foment this initial hostility of the pagans against them. The Romans are going to see them as hostile foreigners, as others. Keep in mind also that most of the Christians at the time came from the poor, many from slaves or people who had worked for the empire in other parts of the empire. And one of the accusations which seem strange to us now is that they were accused, first of all, of being atheists. They were accused of atheism. Why? The way the Romans saw it, because they didn't want, they refused to worship the gods. And if you refused to worship the gods, then you were an atheist. The Christians were accused, it seems kind of paradoxical today, really, of being atheists because precisely they refused to worship the pagan gods, the false gods. Historians of the time explain this very clearly. You were a citizen of the state, of the empire, inasmuch as you participated in the civil worship, and you were not a citizen if you didn't participate in this civil religion. Also, there were lots of calumnies and rumors too about these Christians, about their practices. They held night meetings. That was true. They provoked rebellions and uprisings against the Roman divinities. For example, an author from the 1st century AD, the great historian Tacitus says, for example, I will quote him later a little bit more, but he says that, from the 19th to the 27th of July in the year 64, Rome was destroyed by a great fire. Only 4 of its 14 quarters remained intact. The Emperor Nero was blamed by the people, and so he in turn blamed the Christians. And here's the quote from the Tacitus, from the Annals, book 15, 44. The people would say the fire was ordered. In other words, it came from the authorities. That is what the people believe. The fire was ordered from above. To do away, Tacitus continues, to do away with this rumor, people said the perpetrators were, and executed them with elaborate punishments, what people now call Christians, who are hated for their perversions. Their leader is one such Christus, from whom the name originates, and who suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our own procurators, Pontius Pilate. They are a most mischievous superstition. It was suppressed at the time, but now it has broken out again, not only in Judea, the first source of this evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. He continues, accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the actual crime of firing the city, but of their hatred against mankind. But for their hatred against mankind, mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt as torches to serve as night illumination when daylight had faded. Nero offered his park for the show and staged games in the circus, himself mixing in with the crowd in the garb of a driver or riding a chariot. These roused pity in the populace. Guilty and deserving of extreme measures though they were, the Christians' annihilation seemed to arise not from public utility, but for one man's brutality. That's the end of that quote. So, The 1st century after Christ is a time when any pretext is enough to take Christians before tribunals and courts under the charge of atheism and for not worshipping the gods. One of the most famous cases, of course, we read in the Acts of the Apostles is chapter 19, is St. Paul in Ephesus, for saying this, not to worship pagan gods. So anyway, these first disturbances, as it were, will only get bigger and bigger with time. First, Roman power comes to be aware of this weird, strange movement, religion, and will try to put an end to all these disturbances. That's number one. 2, then these attacks on Christians will grow and grow. Now to say, for example, that Christians were there in Rome specifically to disturb the peace within the empire. Third, now they will notice that Christians actually rejected the religion of the empire, and with this they are putting at risk its foundations. That is, its unity, essential to any empire, to any nation. Unity meaning unity of faith, which makes, from which culture comes. Unity of language, loyalty to the empire, but also loyalty to the emperor. These were not only religious, but also political issues. Remember, the emperor was divus, divine, a god. Not an incarnated god, obviously, but the emperor had the official title of God, of divinity, as we saw in the first video with the Emperor Augustus. Yeah. So this confrontation is going to appear first in isolated skirmishes and riots and things here and there. But remember also that, as historians tells us, not only would they live among the Jews, the non-Christian Jews, the Jews, but the thing is that for the Romans they were the same, the Jews and the Christians. The Christians were seen as a sect, okay, so they were kind of the same, and they lived in the same places. And remember that in the second video I talked about how in between the years 33 after the death of Christ and the year 70 with the destruction of the temple, okay, little by little they were being separated, yes, until they saw themselves not as a sect of Judaism, but the new law, a different religion, certainly based on the first, but a new law, yes. So they lived together, and the Jews are, as you will see in a minute, the Jews are actually going to be expelled from Rome because of the Christians. So, because the Romans didn't distinguish, really. So the hostility from the Jews towards these Jewish Christians is there, very much so. But anyway, it will come to pass that in the year 50, there were a number of riots, and the Emperor Claudius is going to decree that due to these Christians, this is interesting, as I said, due to these Christians, he is going to deport the Jews from Rome. For the first time, the expulsion of the Jews from Rome due to the Christians. Because, as I said, they were considered the same. And hence we can understand the hostility also of the Jews for the Christians. Now, we read in a text by the historian Suetonius, where is Suetonius? Let me see. I show you this book before, Suetonius, The 12 Caesars. It's a great book. If you're ever traveling on a plane or something, get it and read it, because it's very, very well written, very, very readable, and you have 12, so you don't have to read the whole book. And it's an amazing book, very, very readable. Okay, so Suetonius writes, the Emperor Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome, who continually provoked disturbances at the instigation of one such Christus. He's going to expel the Jews from Rome because of Christians. And it is due to this expulsion that we see in the year 50 that St. Paul is going to go to Corinth, and he's going to meet a couple there, very well known in the Acts of the Apostles. Read the Acts of the Apostles if you haven't, or read it again. Acts 18:1. And the couple was two Jews, Aquila and Priscilla, who are going to go with him. Actually emigrated. They were Jews and they had to leave Rome due to this Emperor Claudius edict. Now, the first persecutions will begin now. We're going to talk here about death penalty, killings. There were mainly 4 great persecutions. In summary, we're going to sort of talk about all of them together. But anyway, always charged with atheism, and also the instigation on the part of the Jews inciting the Roman world towards persecution of these Christians. We're going to see what happens. So, the first persecution will be that of Nero, the second Domitian, the third Trajan, and the fourth Marcus Aurelius. Yes, Marcus Aurelius, the sophist, you saw him in the Gladiator movie. Yeah, nice guy. Well, okay. So first, the charges. Atheism. A. Christians were exclusivists, intolerant. They refused to believe that other religions were valid, that their God was to reign in all of society. Number 1. B. They were proselytes, that is, they taught publicly. They were like active missionaries. Yeah? They didn't stay in their homes hidden. They went out and talked, yes. So atheists and impious rejected the official religion. They did not accept to worship the Roman gods. C. It was a foreign superstition. They committed sacrileges, and they would go around destroying statues to the gods. I think St. Patrick in Ireland did a little bit of that, if I'm right. Okay. D. The crime of lèse majesté. This is a crime that involves insulting or defaming a head of state or the state itself. We now call it misinformation or disinformation or malinformation. Okay. All right. So, not to worship the divine emperor, and especially not to pay a coin, a tax, the drachma, which was to go to the emperor himself. The drachma, which was meant to go to the emperor for him, because he was a divus imperator. They would not pay it because if they did that, they would be recognizing him as a divus, as a god. Did I say God? The dog. As a god. Also, they were accused of practicing magic. They were known to expel demons. They kept sacred books in hidden places. They had writings that contained treasures. You must understand that all this was strange to the Romans, really. I can understand that. That they saw them as something very, very unusual. The emperor's edict had obviously the force of law. And with this decree about Christianity, it was with this decree officially prohibited. Christianity was officially prohibited. And obviously the public profession of the Christian faith. So now this has changed things. So now Christians had to choose between apostasy or being charged and imprisoned and practically always killed, punished with death. Well, the penalty for the accused could go from torture, imprisonments, no light, always in the dark, restriction of food, the carrying of chains. Before trial, if there was one, they could officially be tortured to make them renounce that new faith. The punishments could go from the rack, hanging from hooks, any other tool that would make them renounce and apostatize, to renounce the faith. If they didn't give in, sometimes, relatively few times, really, it did happen, they could be exiled, confiscation of property, forced labor. It all seems a little bit far away. Or perhaps not, if you consider that Christians are now suffering right now in many parts of the world. And no one, except perhaps Tucker Carlson, who mentions them from time to time, certainly not this lot of the Vatican, speaks up for them. Anyway, they could be punished to death from being beheaded with a sword, like in St. Paul's case. But you see, if you were poor or a foreigner, even if you were a free man but a foreigner or a slave, then you were used for entertainment. So you would go to the amphitheater there with the wild beasts, or you could be burnt. Sometimes they would be burned. They would put them on a cross upside down, and then they would put fire here with special metal or something, so that they would asphyxiate there. So these were some of the means. There were others how they would be put to death. So first, what happened to the few Christians that actually renounced the faith because of fear? The ones who apostatize. If you did that, you would be slighted by the rest of the community, left aside. Yeah, didn't want to know. At the time, the first Christians were wrong on this because, but come on, they felt that from apostasy there was no way back. There was so much blame attached to it that was it. They felt that it was a sin that could never be forgiven. That is not correct. Yes, that is not right. But this is the first century of Christianity, and I'm not going to judge them. And this was held, actually it wasn't even held by all. It was held by those who were more the rigorist side. Okay, let's put it that way. Now, there is going to be a distinction between apostasies, though. They're going to actually differentiate between different types. First, all apostates were lapsi, from lapsus, falling, have fallen, among them. But then everyone was lapsus. But among those lapsi, there were the sacrificati, the turificati, and the libellaciti. I'm not saying right. Libellatici. Okay, I'll explain. First, the sacrificati. Okay, sacrifice. That meant to make some external offering to the pagan gods. The turificati, that is from the word turifar or turable, the incense censer, incense burner, so if you touch or incense, even if it was just a little grain of incense, and placed it there in the sacred fire to some pagan divinity. And lastly, and they were considered the worst, the hypocrites, the more sort of politically correct, as it were, who wants to be in the good graces with both God and the devil, the libellaciti. From libelli, okay, the libello was a document, an official document, an official certificate, actually, and that would assure the authorities and everybody else that you were in good conduct, as it were. Okay, so, but the thing is that they would pay for it. They would bribe someone for it just to get the certificate. Wanting to remain Christians, but paying for this. And that was considered, no, if you were a Christian, you had to stand up and be a Christian. You couldn't just go around bribing officials. It was the hypocrisy of it that offended them. Okay, so what were the persecutions? Okay, we said that there were 4 major ones. Okay, the first, and the one that is going to come almost unexpectedly in this very rigorous manner, is that of Nero, the Emperor Nero. Infamous, there's an absolute crazy, insane pervert. I did a video on him. I think it was back in January. Okay, so there is going to be this fire that Rome had in the year 64. A fire was not an unusual thing in Rome. There had been many fires, but this one was particularly horrendous. Remember that a lot of people, a lot of poor people, indigent people, came to the capital, and they lived in ghettos outside. A fire is quite possible to occur. And in the year 64, July of 64, in the surroundings of where the Circus Maximus was, that was Nero's private enterprise thing, his circus. Today it would be outside the city. But anyway, today is inside the city. In those days it would be outside the city. There were many humble neighborhoods, ghettos really, and it is because of this fire that they'll start a great persecution against the Christians. Of the 14 neighborhoods existing in Rome at that time outside, in the outside of the city, 10 are going to be burnt to a cinder. The flames advanced. People fled in terror. Many died. Tragedy. Anyway, it lasted a whole week. Now, as we heard, some say it was an accident. It could be. A fire, yeah. But others held that it was an sort of an urban cleansing operation by the emperor, who wanted to get rid of these people. Could be. Some saw it as a punishment of the gods due to this insane, dissipated life of the emperor, who will go down in history as the most insane. And there were, just moral degeneracy, moral decadence complete. Okay. Why do I say insane and decadent and all that? Well, goodness gracious. Okay. Just a few little things. He asked his tutor, the philosopher Seneca, who had tutored him as a boy, actually, to cut his veins. He kicked his wife to death, actually kicked her to death. He had many wives, by the way. Many of the wives were males, young boys or perhaps young adolescents, okay? And he absolutely loved having weddings, to have a wedding. So he would dress this young boy as a bride, okay, and have a wedding. In some of the weddings, he himself would be the bride, and he would dress as a bride and so on. And then many heard, when they retired to their couch, they heard the groans and shouts, and because he was pretending that he loved this. He pretended that he was losing his virginity. Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, so well, it is kind of painful, but not, the 5,000th time, Anyway, there he was always, okay, never mind. But this is the thing, that his wife, official wife, Poppaea, whom he killed, kicked to death, he was, according to the historian, the Jewish historian that I quoted from about destruction of the temple, Flavius Josephus, okay, who was Jewish. He was never a Christian, but he said that Poppaea, his wife, was a very pro-Jewish woman, and according to him, he says that she was the one who told him to use the Christians as an excuse. It was a good excuse because people were accusing him, blaming him. So this was great. Okay, so so I have the text here from Tacitus. I think I read a little bit of it at the beginning. The fire was ordered, the people believed, to do away with this rumor. People said that the perpetrators were that the Christians were the perpetrators, and were executed with elaborate punishments. These people that are called Christians, who are hated for their perversions. Their leader is one such Christus, from whom the name originated, and who suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius, at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. A most mischievous superstition, suppressed at the time, but which broke out again not only in Judea, the first source of this evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted. Listen to this, not so much for the actual crime of firing the city, but because of their hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt as torches, to serve as a nightly illumination when deadlight had faded. Nero offered his circus, for the show, and staged games in the circus, himself mixing in the crowd in the garb of a driver or riding a chariot. These roused pity in the populace. Guilty and deserving of extreme measures though they were, the Christians' annihilation seemed to arise not from public utility, but for one man's brutality. So hatred of mankind, enemies of the human race. So, there is going to be a law now in the year 64, which is going to be known in the history of Rome as the Institutum Neronianum, a specific law whereby Christianity is now prohibited. You can say, well, religion was prohibited, but remember that for Rome this was absolutely unimaginable. Rome had always boasted of being tolerant with all the religions, except for that religion who wanted to have its own worship and its own God. They accepted all religions except the one which says this is the only true one. Just be tolerant with everything, but don't stand on any one principle. That was not to be tolerated. This is going to take the Catholic Church by surprise. In a relatively short time, the prisons are going to be full of Christians. Prisoners were tortured, many beheaded, or taken to Nero's private circus. And the circus was in the Vatican Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome. According to Tacitus, many were wrapped in animal skins, as I said, and then used as hunting prey, or ended up torn by beasts in the games. Some others became living torches to light with the fat of the human body the streets of Rome, as he said. In that wonderful testimony that was left for us Catholics in the Church, the Acta of the Martyrs, the Latin Acta Martyrum, these are accounts of the suffering and death of Christian martyrs one martyr or groups of martyrs. And these accounts were collected and used and are used in church liturgies from the earliest of times, as attested by St. Augustine. In them we see the court trials of the first Christians, how they will die. There is a famous sentence there, written there. It says from one of them, "We are tormented for confessing the faith. We are punished if we persevere, punished for the mere fact that we are Christians." After this persecution that starts in 64, 3 years later, St. Peter and St. Paul's martyrdom. St. Peter was actually in the circus that Nero had for entertainment at the Vatican Hill. He didn't know who Peter was, obviously, it was just one more. So, to give an idea of where he was, if you look at the facing the Vatican, the Basilica there, okay, in front of you, okay, to your left, sort of diagonally, that is where the circus was. That is where Nero's private circus was. And he held games there and races and public shows. They're just for fun. There are going to be many, many Christians killed. So we can say that from this year 64 until the year 313, Constantine, there is going to be not one single day in which the Catholic Church would feel threatened by Roman power. Almost 300 years of tireless, permanent persecution. Nero's successors will continue on, sometimes more aggressively, some more aggressively than others. Some harsh persecutions and others with a certain liberty to, the commissaries to apply Nero's decree with a certain, perhaps more freedom. But the most important, as I said before, Nero the First, okay, the second with the Emperor Domitian, about 20 years after Nero. This is about the year 81. Domitian was a man in other areas. He had some qualities, but he had many, many vices too. And especially with time, he became worse and worse. He was very arrogant. He was to be called, to be addressed by Lord God Domitian. He was, in a certain sense, also a kind of a weird guy. He was Titus' brother. Remember in the second video, Titus was the general who actually carried out the destruction of the temple, in Jerusalem. Vespasian was his father. He was now emperor. He was the general there. Well, Domitian was his brother. All right, and he had taken part in the destruction of the temple too, but he never felt as that he was up to Titus' standard or something like that. He always felt that he was being left behind by father and brother, and so he absolutely hated him. He hated his brother Titus. While the emperor Vespasian and Titus went about in sedan chairs, he had to follow behind and be content with going on a litter, which was different. And although he had taken part in the Judean triumph, as they said, he had to ride behind them on a white horse, but never mind. Okay, so he also would marry, divorce. His wife fell in love with an actor called Paris. Oh my goodness, he would punish anyone who studied under Paris and all that. But he brought her back, forced her back, to my divine bed, he said. That's a good line for you guys over there. Come to my divine bed, okay? So but he took her against her wish. She didn't want to go. But anyway, from the beginning of his reign, Domitian would spend, listen to this, he would spend hours alone every day, doing nothing more than catching flies and then stabbing them with a needle-sharp pen. That's what he did. Actually, once when one of his attendants, Vivius Crispus, was asked whether there was anyone there closeted with the emperor, he said, no, not even a fly. This is what he did. All right. So then he had gladiator games, yes, for sure. He grew more and more cruel with time. But the thing about Domitian is that he was seen as very devious and very cunning. That is what Tacitus, the historian, says. One little example. He summoned a bookkeeper to his bedroom, invited him to share his couch, made him feel secure and happy, condescended to offer him portions of his dinner, yet had already given orders for his crucifixion on the following day. Anyway, he defended the national religion as something properly Roman against proselytes, and especially from the East, actually. To keep all Roman traditions, he's going to take the initiative once again to punish Christians harshly, and allowing for something unique in the Roman penal code. And that was that you could accuse someone and remain anonymous as an accuser. That had never been done, not in Rome, even during the medieval Inquisition. All accusations against one person, if you were to accuse someone, you were under what was considered the Italian law. Italian law goes back to prehistoric times. It goes back to Babylon, and it was it was interpreted with time. It was interpreted in different ways. It was to be interpreted as an eye for an eye, all kinds of things. But it goes back to Babylon. But it eventually was understood as if you accuse someone falsely of something, knowingly, then you are to be punished with the same punishment that would have been inflicted on that person had he been guilty. So be careful if you're going to accuse someone falsely. Okay, that was the general understanding. So penal law itself is going to change in Rome. Anonymous accusations were allowed against Christians, and this is going to be chaotic. The initial motive for this was that the Christians rejected, again, paying a drachma to him, but this was a different one. It was a 2 drachma. It was a coin. Well, it was a tax, the diadrachma, a special coin, and both Jews and Christians were to pay this, and this money was going to be used towards the construction of a temple to Jupiter. A temple to Jupiter. Where this temple to Jupiter? You'll never guess. Where the old temple in Jerusalem, Solomon's temple, had been. He was going to build a temple there. I mean, middle finger really, I guess. Devious and cunning, perfidious, I would say. Okay, another martyr, St. John the Apostle, yeah. The evangelist, St. John, his martyrdom. Well, no, because he didn't die, but anyway, before I tell you that, let me read to you an extract. I said I was going to do it at the end. An extract from Tertullian, Christian first century theologian, great writer. He's not a saint for some weird misinterpretations of something but this is his Apologia, an extract. Apologia means defense, yeah? So his famous sentence is, "The blood of Christians is seed." The blood of the people, the blood of the people you kill are seed. It's not going to die. It's going to grow. Let me introduce him to you. This is fantastic. Don't go away now. You have to stay here and listen. I hope I can read it properly. First, Tertullian was born in Carthage. Today is modern Tunis, at about the time of Polycarp's death, and probably trained as a lawyer. He converted from his pagan background and devoted himself to writing impassioned books, more than 30 in total, in defense of the true faith. He attacked the pagan religions of the Roman Empire and challenged heretical versions of Christianity. He went against heresies with he was one of the generation of apologists, 2nd century theologians who wrote for a hostile readership in an attempt to challenge pagan misunderstanding and prejudice, showing that Christianity was reasonable and respectable, not a shameful secret society. This text that I'm going to read to you is from his most famous writing, Defense, alternatively translated as Apology, but don't be misled. There isn't defensive or apologetic sentence in it at all, not one. Its aim is to argue the case for Christianity, correct people's misconceptions about it, and undermine their confidence in the superiority of paganism. He also challenges the Roman policy of killing Christians who will not apostatize, renounce their faith. He was the first theologian of the Western Church and the first to write in Latin. His writings not only made an impression on the pagan world, but helped to boost the Church's self-confidence. Here he goes. Having demonstrated this unjust public hatred against us, I will now make my stand and show our blamelessness. I not only refute the charges that are laid against us, but I turn them back on our accusers, showing that while Christians are free from these crimes they're accused of, they are widespread nevertheless among the accusers, as well they know. We are accused as of being monsters of wickedness, observing a sacred rite in which we kill a little child and then eat it. Then, after the feast, we are supposed to practice incest, the dogs who rule us turning out the lights so that our impious lusts might have the cover of shameless darkness. This is what is constantly laid to our charge, and yet you, the accusers, you never try to uncover the truth. Well, if you believe it, bring the matter to the light of day. If you will not look into it, then do not believe it. We insist that there is no reality at all in these accusations, that you dare not find out the truth of. We are assaulted and betrayed every day. Our meetings are often attacked. But who ever heard a child crying out here? Who ever gave evidence to the judge of our gory deeds? Have those who discovered such atrocities concealed them or been bribed? If we are so secretive, how did you find out what we do? Not from our own guilty lips, obviously, so it must be from strangers. But how would they find out? All religious initiations keep the profane away, let alone such ones as you suppose ours are. Everyone knows what rumor is like. One of your own proverbs says, "Of all evils, rumor flies the fastest." Why is rumor such an evil thing? Is it because it is fast? Is it because it carries information? Or is it because it is utterly false? And then Tertullian goes and gives very many examples. He says, Tertullian argues that pagan rites themselves are often corrupt and that the Christian scriptures are superior in age and divinity, and he protests Christian loyalty to the emperor. And then he goes on. Having refuted the charges laid against us, let me now show what we really are. We are a body knit together by one faith, one discipline, and one hope. We meet together as a congregation, uniting together to offer prayer to God. We pray for the emperors and all in authority, for the welfare of the world, for peace and for the delay of the final end. We read our holy scriptures to nourish our faith, hope, steadfastness, and good conduct. We hear exhortations and rebukes. Confession. We take such judging very seriously, as befits those who believe they are in the sight of God, especially seriously when anyone sins so grievously we have to cut them off from our prayer, our congregation, and all sacred things. Can't receive communion, yeah? Our elders preside over us, obtaining that honor not by money, but by their established character. There is no buying and selling in the things of God, though we have a fund, but not because people can buy religion. Once a month, anyone who wants to make a small donation, but only he who is able and willing. There is no compulsion. It is not spent on feasts, but to support and bury poor people, to provide for orphans, the elderly, victims of shipwreck, and those in prison for their faith. No one considers how great a loss it is to the empire, what an injury to the state, when people as virtuous as we are put to death in such numbers, and so many of the truly good suffer the ultimate penalty. Here we call your own acts to witness, you who are daily presiding at the trials of prisoners and passing sentence upon crimes. In your long lists of those accused of many and various atrocities, has any assassin, any thief, any guilty of sacrilege or seduction or stealing bathers' clothes ever been named as a Christian too? Or when Christians are brought before you purely on the charge of being Christians, do you ever find them to be guilty of such crimes? It is always with your folk, you folk, the pagans, that the prisons are steaming, the mines are sighing, the wild beasts are fed. It is from you that the organizers of the gladiatorial circus always get their herds of criminals to feed up for the occasion. You will find no Christians there unless they are there simply because they are Christians. We and we alone are without crime, and there is nothing strange about that because it is an absolute necessity for us. We have a perfect knowledge of what goodness is, being taught by a perfect master, God himself. And faithfully we do his will, being commanded by a judge we dare not despise. Your ideas of virtue, on the other hand, come from mere human opinion, and you are commanded by human authority. This means that your understanding of morality is deficient. It is incomplete and lacks the authority to produce a life of real virtue. Human knowledge of what is good is easily deceived, and human authority is easily despised. So, which is a better rule? To say, you shall not kill, or to teach, do not even be angry? Which is more perfect, to forbid adultery, or to restrain from a single lustful look? Which indicates the higher mind, prohibiting evil doing or evil speaking? No doubt about it, we who receive our reward under the judgment of an all-seeing God and who look forward to eternal punishment from him for our sins, look towards, I suppose, we alone make a real effort to lead a blameless life, inspired by our greater knowledge, the impossibility of concealing anything, the severity of the threatened torment, not merely long but everlasting, and our fear of the judge whom all should fear and by which fear they are judged. I mean, not the proconsul, but God. All you can do to us depends upon our own pleasure. Being a Christian is obviously a matter of my own choice. So you can only condemn me for Christianity if I choose to be condemned. Do whatever you can to me on that score, and you do it at my will, not in your power. These people's rejoicing in our persecution is therefore utterly groundless. When they delight in our suffering, they are merely sharing in our joy, because we would far rather be condemned than betray God. Those who hate us should regret rather than rejoice in our condemnation, as we have obtained the very thing we choose. And in that case, you say, why do you complain about being persecuted? You should be grateful to us for giving you the sufferings that you want. Well, it is quite true that it is our desire to suffer, but in the same way that a soldier longs for war. Of course, no one suffers willingly, since suffering involves fear and danger. But we are like those who object to the conflict, but fight with all our strength, and when victorious rejoice in the battle, because they reap from it glory and spoil. It is our battle to be summoned to your courts, and in fear of execution to fight there for the truth. But the battle is won when the goal of the struggle is reached. This victory of ours gives us the glory of pleasing God and the spoil of eternal life. But you say we are vanquished. Yes, when we have obtained our wishes. Therefore, we conquer in dying. We seize the victory in the very moment that we are overcome. Bound to a stake, we are burned on a heap of wood. Excuse me. Bound to a stake, we are burned on a heap of wood. This is the attitude in which we conquer. It is our victory robe. It is our triumphal entry. This attitude does not please those whom we overcome. Because of it, we are counted a desperate, reckless race. But the very desperation and recklessness you object to in us, you exalt among yourselves as a standard of virtue in the cause of glory and of fame. Mucius, a martyr, of his own will, left his right hand on the altar. What sublimity of mind! Empedocles gave his whole body at Catana to the fires of Etna. What resolution! The founder of Carthage gave herself away in second marriage to the funeral pile. What a noble witness of her chastity! Zeno the Eleatic, when he was asked by Dionysius what the good of philosophy is, answered that it teaches contempt of death, and so was handed over to the tyrant's whip without flinching, and sealed his opinion with his death. We all know how the Spartan lash, applied with the utmost cruelty under the very eyes of encouraging friends, confers honor on the young men who endure it in proportion to the blood which they shed. For such human glory you count it neither reckless folly nor desperate obstinacy to despise death and all kinds of savage treatment. You will endure this for your home country, for the empire, for friendship, but not for God. You cast statues in honor of such people. You put inscriptions upon their images and carve epitaphs on their tombs, so that their names may never perish. So far as you can, by your monuments, you grant your sons the resurrection of the dead. But anyone who expects the true resurrection from God and so suffers for God is insane. Go zealously on, good presidents. You will stand higher with the people if you sacrifice us, kill us, torture us, condemn us, and grind us to dust as they demand. Your injustice is the proof that we are innocent. That is why God allows us to suffer. Did you not just recently condemn a Christian woman to be violated by men rather than thrown to the lions? In doing so, you showed that we consider a taint on our purity something more terrible than any punishment and any death. Your cruelty, however great, is more a temptation to us than a benefit to you. The more we are mown down by you, the more we grow. The blood of Christians is seed. Many of your writers, such as Cicero and Seneca, exhort their readers to bear pain and death bravely, and yet their words do not find so many disciples as Christians do, who teach not by word, but by deed. In fact, the teacher is this very obstinacy that you rail against. All who contemplate it want to find out what is at the bottom of it. All who find out embrace our doctrines. And hold on. And all who have embraced them desire to suffer in order to become part of the fullness of God's grace and obtain God's complete forgiveness by giving in exchange for their blood. For that secures the remission of all offenses. And this is why it is that we give you thanks on the very spot for your sentence on us, as the divine and human are ever opposed to each other. When we are condemned by you, we are acquitted by the highest. That is, excuse me, my voice is gone. That is an extract from the great Tertullian. Just to finish, and I'll finish with this, back to St. John the Apostle, St. John the Evangelist. They intended to kill him. In the year 95, they take him to outside Rome and put him in a cauldron of boiling oil inside. And nothing happens. Then they will exile him to the island of Patmos, where he dies later. There is a church, it is called Saint Giovanni a Porta Latina. Actually, that's where he was actually, they tried to martyr him. And I'll finish with this. A memorable martyr, Saint Ignatius of Antioch. It is used in the liturgy of the church. Memorable words. He says he is going to. He writes as he is as they are taking him to the circus in Rome to be eaten by lions. He knew that this was where he was going. As he is, they arrested him, right? And as they arrest him, every time that the soldiers have to stop and eat or whatever, he actually writes a letter to the local church, the local Christians there. 7 survived. Beautiful, beautiful letters. Good for meditation anyway. But one of them, I'll finish with this. I was writing, just before death, I was writing to all of the churches, and they, and to all ideally encourage the same. I will willingly die for God as long as you will not hinder me from doing so. I beg you, please, do not show me inappropriate benevolence. Let me be food to beasts, since this will make it possible to get near to God. And then this sentence that is very, very well known. I am but the wheat of God. The wheat of God. And I am to be ground by the teeth of beasts, so as to be clean bread to Christ. Pray for me to Christ, so that through these instruments I might finally be a sacrificial victim to God. That is Saint Ignatius of Antioch, bishop. He actually knew the Apostle John. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope that this has been fruitful. Thank you. Bye-bye.